This happened 2 summers ago, while I was house-sitting out in Oregon for an older couple that I'd met at a conference for work. It had seemed like a dream scenario. The couple wanted to vacation in Maui for 2 weeks, but didn't want to board their cats. And I had been chatting with them about wanting to visit Oregon again, where they happened to live, because I had really loved it the first time I went. And we figured that we could mutually benefit if I came out, and how sad for them. So, I flew out there and they showed me around for a few days and taught me how to care for the cats and plants, and gave me access to their house and cars. It was 2 of their cats, one that was extremely shy and I barely saw, which is important later. These people truly were so generous. And before I knew it, I had dropped them off at the airport and I was on my own. At first, it really was the dream vacation. I was staying in Bend and making forays into Portland, Eugene, and Ashland. In the mornings, I could walk out the front door and surely be hiking the path surrounding nearby Mount Bachelor, and was just ultra content with the world. I was so enamored by the area that I had actually started looking into taking steps to relocate out there even. But then one day, about halfway through my final week there, when I got back to the house, I felt really odd, almost like I shouldn't go inside. I shook it off and went inside anyway because it was getting late and I needed to put out dinner for the cats. Once I was inside, I had forced myself to ignore how off I felt, and I then made some food for myself and went to bed and was shocked to find the shy cat hiding under my bed and crying. This was the first time I had even seen her close up. The entire time I had been there up to that point, she had never left my host's bedroom unless she didn't realize I was around. Again, I ignored feeling weird and just assumed that she had decided I was okay and went to bed. I did start locking my bedroom door that night though. I also remember that about halfway through that night, I thought I heard someone walking around in the gravel outside of my window. But after listening for a bit, I didn't hear anything else and went back to sleep. The day after, in the morning, I still felt a little odd, but kept up with my plans for the day. I drove out to a little music festival in Eugene and went clothes shopping and had an overall great day. When I got back to the house though, I found the front door locked in a way that I hadn't left it. Basically, my host never locked the deadbolt, only the lower second lock. And that's the only lock my key worked on. So I never messed with the deadbolt, but it was definitely locked. So I had to call my hosts and find the hide key, which to their credits, safety-wise, was buried like a whole foot underneath the bush right outside, and had definitely not been unearthed for a long time. So, I used that, went inside, and kept the key with me just in case it happened again. And it did, but with a different door. This time, I had stepped out into the garage to get a drink. And when I turned around to go back into the house, the door was shut and locked. I could use my normal key on that door, but I was still pretty bewildered. My own cats are whack, so I think in my mind I was still trying to come up with a way the cats would be locking me out of the house, but I was coming up empty. I decided that I must have been misunderstanding how the locks worked, and just wrote it off and started checking and triple checking the locks when I went out of the house or out into the garage. That night, when I went to bed, the really awful feeling of unease was still there. And so was the shy cat who was clearly unhappy to see me, but also wouldn't leave my room. But again, I just locked my bedroom door and went to sleep. The next morning I felt awful. Nausea, body aches. I had no desire to leave the house, so I decided to just stay in and Netflix for a day. This vacation stay was like a full 2 weeks, so I didn't feel like I was in any hurry to get all my touristy things in anyways. But as the day went on, I started to feel that feeling of wrongness yet again, and it morphed into feeling incredibly watched. Around mid-afternoon, it got to the point that I was so uneasy that even feeling awful, I decided to get out of the house for a bit to shake it off. I was getting a bit low on food. So, I went to the grocery store and bought a couple of food items that I didn't think would hurt my stomach. And as I started to leave the checkout, the cashier said the generic, "Have a great evening." And I just instantly started crying, shocking myself and the poor cashier because I just had this intrusive thought that said, "You might be the last person to ever say that to me." When I got to my car, I was still crying and my entire body was telling me to not drive back to the house. I couldn't not though, because I didn't want to neglect the cats. So I drove back, parked in the driveway, and convinced myself after about half an hour to just go open the front door. Once I did that, I thought I would get over it and be able to go in and at least feed the cats, and then maybe I'd get a hotel room after, but my body physically would not let me inside. It was like I was stuck in the entryway. I then made a deal with myself. I would yell into the house saying I'd already called the police, and that they were on their way. In panic logic, I figured that would make anyone in the house leave. So, I faced inside the house, looking down the hallway towards the bedrooms. And I did just that. The second that I had finished saying, "They're almost here. So, if you want to avoid being arrested, you need to leave now." The light in my host room turned on, and I heard some banging. I immediately hiked it back to the car, called the police for real, and proceeded to have a mental breakdown while talking to the dispatcher. Once they got there, they checked the house and didn't find anyone. But the double doors in my host bedroom were left wide open. I'm so glad the cats didn't get out. There was a pile of food wrappers in the corner behind the blinds, so they said it looked like someone had been there. What makes it so scary to me is that nothing was taken. And based on the shape of the house, that would have been the perfect vantage point to see me in the living room as I stayed home sick. To explain this, the house was in L shape, and from the windows into the garden that were in my host bedroom, you could see into the living room windows. Also, the minute the police were gone, they said they couldn't prove anyone was there. There were no signs of forced entry, and we couldn't get a hold of my hosts immediately to verify if anything had been taken, which once they were back, they verified that nothing had been taken. So, they said they patrolled a bit, but nothing else. The shy cat was right back in my host bedroom, and I didn't see her again until I left to go back home. So basically, I think the intruder had been there at least 2 days, forcing her to choose between two strangers and leading her to choose the one that was at least a little less strange. Me. It messed me up pretty badly, especially because they didn't catch the person and didn't seem to have any desire to actually look, and I still had to stay in that house for the next 3 days. Nothing else odd had happened, and I didn't feel anything off for the rest of the time I was there. But the damage was already done. I've never felt completely safe in a home without doing a complete search before bed since. But I'm extremely glad my gut spoke up. I guess I'd rather have some residual anxiety than be dead. This happened more than 10 years ago when I was still a student. It has a few graphic details of animal harm and violence, so discretion is advised. A bit of backstory. As with most students, I was always broke and had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I've always had a love for animals. So when this couple contacted me to ask me to house sit for them for the last few days before they returned from their overseas trip, since the last sitter bailed on them and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone, I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me the full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it even more appealing. Little did I know how bad it would turn out. I got the details, picked up the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house as it was already after 5 p.m. and almost dark since it was early spring. I got to the house, which was a really nice place, by the way, but it bordered a not-so-great area of Brisbane that was and still is very prone to crime, house break-ins, robberies, etc. It didn't bother me too much because, nothing will ever happen to me. I know, young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch, watching movies, jacuzzi, and just generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I went on over to check on the doggo. I got a call from them at about 10 p.m. saying their flight got delayed. They were going to stay at a hotel and do the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning. They asked if I could sleep there again that night, which was fine. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in my car. I called my dad to let him know of the plans, as I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. I normally didn't give them details like that because I was old enough to look after myself. I still believe to this day that that probably saved my life. I eventually got to bed at about 1 a.m., and it felt like I had only slept 5 minutes when I was awoken by the sound of a window breaking. I could hear movement and what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as just pressing one button. My dad was the last number I had called, hoping that he would wake up from the call. I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and mattress in case my dad picked up, so that he could hear what was going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see a silhouette, and he had a knife in his hand. When he saw me, he raised it and came at me. Now, one thing to those unfamiliar with Australia, and some of the crime in certain areas, is that robberies and home invasions can be very brutal. People get murdered or tortured if they even slightly retaliate or don't cooperate with the robbers. When he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I could. Now, I'm not a small guy by any means. I'm 6 feet 3 inches, and at that stage, I weighed about 220 pounds and was fit and strong. My time not spent at university or work was at the gym. I could do an easy 250 pounds bench, 350 pounds squat. When I kicked and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife flew out of his hand as well. Before he had the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my knee right into his face, and in return, his head into the wall. I knew my life depended on it, so I put in some extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes. But before I could get up, I heard the sound of a pistol cocking, and I froze. It felt like all the blood drained from my body, and I became just numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, I'd rather die than be disabled or dependent on other people to take care of me. He stood there with the pistol against my head for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 10 seconds. I did not move. He eventually said in very broken English to get on the bed, face down. I panicked but thought, if he wanted to shoot me, he already would have. So I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into a fetal position with my back against the wall, just so that if they wanted to stab me, I had my arms and legs in front to protect my torso. By that time, I had forgotten that I had called my dad, and the guy I had kneed was still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I couldn't understand what was said, but I recognized it from holidays in East Timor, where that's the main language spoken. The one guy tried to get the guy I had put down off the ground, while another started ransacking the house, shoving valuables into a big bag. It was about this time I heard tires screeching and a car approaching. The car skidded to a halt right in front of the gate, and I heard someone scream. It was my dad. The three inside the house panicked and ran out the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now, I know my dad missed them on purpose because if he wanted to hit them, he would have. He's not only the best shot I know, but also ex-military and represented Australia in the clay pigeon championships a few years back. He's a gunsmith by trade and has various regional pistol and rifle championship titles. I've seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with his pistol. Politics and the legal situation in the country would have had him in serious trouble had he hit one of them. I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote. My dad called the police while he came in. I met him at the front door, and we walked down to the car to wait for the police. It took them over an hour to get there, some excuse of no vehicle available. By that time, I'd calmed down a bit and started to look for the dog. I couldn't find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard. As I got to the corner, I saw her laying on the ground. I got to her and saw she was dead. Later, autopsies revealed she was poisoned. The police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is unfortunately common practice in some areas here for dealing with dogs at houses targeted for break-ins. I was fuming and heartbroken. The police were also pretty indifferent and barely took our statements. By that time it was starting to get light. I retrieved my bag, phone, and locked the house as best I could without touching anything and drove home behind my dad. Only when I got home did I get the full story from his side. He had answered my call to hear shouting and what sounded like fighting in the background. When I didn't respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. Luckily, I had given him the address the night before. He knows the area well and found the house quickly. He stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he stopped at the gate. My parents' house is about 6 miles from there, and it's normally a 20-minute drive. The call duration was 7 minutes and 13 seconds. I met the detective later that day, gave my statement, they took fingerprints, etc. The owners got back about the same time. The rest of the day was a blur as I came down from the shock and adrenaline. Now, that's not where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys and that I must come to a lineup to identify them. I specifically told her I didn't see any of their faces. It was dark, and after the guy held the gun to my head, I was under the blanket the whole time. She assured me they caught them on fingerprints and would show them to me beforehand, which might not be the correct procedure, but they wanted solid evidence. I got to the police station. Unlike in the movies, there was no one-way glass or separate room. They brought the 3 guys into a room and made them stand against the wall. The one I was later told was the leader, the one I had kneed, looked at me with so much hate I had never seen anything like it. He had the eyes of someone who would slit your throat and not blink. His name was Carlos Mendez. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit throat gesture. We left the room, and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet. Among other charges, 4 counts of murder, 9 for attempted murder, multiple assaults, aggravated assault, over 100 counts of home invasion, robbery, and rape. I was shocked. The detective told me that had I not taken him out quickly that night, I would not have gotten away so easily. But that's still not where the story ends. 3 days later, I got another call from the detective saying I should be careful. Carlos had escaped from custody, and they hadn't caught him yet. I wasn't too worried, since the robbery wasn't in my house and I had changed cars, so he likely couldn't find me. Also, I had obtained my own firearm license and carried my pistol 24/7. I didn't hear anything for a while until about 2 years later, when I ran into the detective at the grocery store. We started talking about the case, and she told me he was killed during another home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was waiting for him, shot him once in the stomach and once in the neck. Thanks to the slow emergency response, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. All 3 of the men were undocumented nationals from East Timor, with no previous ID or fingerprints in the system. Many believe that a large portion of violent crime here is done by illegal immigrants from East Timor, Papua New Guinea, and nearby countries. It's fairly easy to flee back across the border and avoid prosecution. This whole ordeal made me more alert, heightened my awareness, and a little more paranoid. I double and triple check all doors now, but it's also robbed me of my peace of mind. I've since moved to a safer country, but I still sometimes wake up at night if I hear a noise. So to keep up with tradition, Carlos, will never meet again as you're now gone. But to his cronies or anyone thinking of trying something similar, you're welcome to pay me a visit. I'll make sure your departure is just as swift. And to Carlos, I hope you died in agony for poisoning Bella. I'm from a small town in the Ozarks with a population of less than 7,000. There were about 80 people in my high school class, and people are generally very trusting. This story took place early last September, so it would have been a little less than a year ago. I was a 20-year-old male at the time and had just entered my junior year of college about 3 hours from my hometown. In high school, I had a close cohort of friends. There were about 8 of us that were very close. As things go, things changed when we went to our respective colleges. I fell out of touch with many of them, but I did retain contact with a couple of them. The ones featured in the story are Jake and Trevor. Last September, I got a call from my mother telling me the news. Trevor's father had been killed in an accident on his way to work. It was a sudden but brutal collision involving a semi. Trevor's family wasn't from the area originally. They had moved to my town during high school because her dad had gotten a job there. Having no family and a dispersed set of friends, she didn't have many people to lean on during this time. Jake contacted me and wanted to know whether I had planned on attending the funeral, which had been planned for Friday morning. I had an important class Friday afternoon, but I told him that I would come up that evening and we would help occupy Trevor. Jake made the 6-hour drive from his college to attend the funeral, and I made it into town later that evening. We decided that the 3 of us would spend a few hours at Jake's house. We were just going to hang out, and Jake and I were determined to preoccupy Trevor. I got there around 6 o'clock, and we jumped right into it. We talked about college, watched Netflix, and we played board games. Despite the circumstances, it was a pretty good night. I got up to leave about half an hour after midnight. After some tearful goodbyes, I got in my car. Now, for a little geography, Jake's house is a little more than a mile from my parents' house. There are no red lights and 1 stop sign. At that time of night, I could make the trip in less than 2 minutes. Being in a rural part of the Ozarks, though, the roads were far from straight. In fact, Jake's house was just off a winding 2-lane road. There are several blind curves that stop you from seeing what's coming up ahead, and there are no guardrails or streetlights to speak of. So, I start on what I thought would be a brief, uneventful journey home. I pull out of his driveway and start on my way. I start into the first blind curve, and I'm greeted by something entirely unexpected. I see the car first. It's a wide older model sedan. It is half in my lane and half in a culvert. I have to quickly swerve to avoid hitting it, and I notice a figure waving his arms as I slam on the brakes. I end up stopped on the side of the road. There's no shoulder, so my car is sitting in the road and in the grass about 100 feet past his car. At this point, I should have kept the car going and called the police for help when I got home. But that's not what I did. I ignored that feeling in my gut, put my car in park, and opened my door. I stepped outside and immediately noticed the damage to the vehicle. The front end had serious damage. There were no other cars around, so I concluded the driver must have collided with the cliffside on the other side of the road. It was really dark though, so I had a hard time figuring out what happened. By the red light emitted from my tail lights, I saw the figure approaching me. "Hey buddy, I need some help." "What happened? Is there someone you'd like me to call?" "No. I tried to call my brother, but he didn't answer. He just lives up the road." "Oh, do you want me to call the police?" "No. You can't call the police. I just need my car pulled out of there." He pointed to the culvert. "I need someone with a truck. My brother has one." He was walking closer to me, and I was beginning to make out some of his features. He was a little bit shorter than me, but he easily had 75 pounds on me. At this point, the low light left me unable to discern much else, except that he was wearing a baseball cap. "Well, I don't have a truck, so I guess I can't help you." I was beginning to feel very uncomfortable. He kept approaching me, and there was something wrong in his voice. A flatness, like he had no emotion at all about the predicament he was in. I started to walk backwards toward my car door. "Drive me to my brother's house. He lives just up the road." He pointed in the opposite direction of my home as he walked toward my passenger side. "I have to get home, man. My family's expecting me." I lied. They had all been asleep for hours, and I was still in Jake's house for all they knew. "It'll just take a minute. He lives on Maple Creek Road. His house is only about a mile away." He kept progressing. My heart was racing, but I was in a strange predicament. I wanted to get the hell out of there, but there wasn't an ideal way to do it. My car doors were unlocked, and he was getting very close to my car. Being as fast as possible, I couldn't get in and lock the door before he opened the one on the other side. I certainly couldn't put it in drive and pull away before he put at least some of himself in my passenger seat. Seeing as how he was going to get in my car if he wanted to, I decided to go the cordial route. If this was going to happen, it was going to be on my terms. I knew Maple Creek Road. My sister's boyfriend actually lived there, and I knew that it was less than a mile from where I currently sat. It was a one-lane holler, as we colloquially refer to a hollow. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was about to do a good deed. "Okay, get in." He sat down in my passenger seat, right about the time I made it into the driver's seat. Since the doors were open, my car's interior lights were on. This was the first good look I had at him. He was older than me, probably in his late 40s. He was dirty, very dirty. His hands were greasy, his shirt full of holes, and there were literally flies congregating around him. My car instantly smelled like body odor and body fluids, if you catch my drift. I experienced immediate regret. This was a horrible idea. My parents had taught me about this. My mother was a true crime junkie, and she had always warned me about situations like this. He closed the doors and the lights went out. I made a U-turn and started heading toward Maple Creek Road. He insisted on talking to me, although I would have much preferred the hum of the radio. He asked me my name. He asked where I lived. He asked what I did. I evaded every question I deemed too personal, because I didn't want him knowing too much information about me. I began to get the distinct feeling that something was wrong with him. He spoke without emotion or any kind of inflection. Sometimes he had a hard time getting the words out. I concluded that he was either on a mind-altering substance or was playing with less than a full deck of cards. I also want to mention that there's a serious prescription drug abuse issue in the area. We were turning onto Maple Creek Road when he began admiring my car. It was a fairly nice foreign car that my parents bought me for my 16th birthday. He rubbed the dashboard with his greasy hand before he started pressing buttons, both on the car and deep in my psyche. "This is a nice car. A really nice car. You know, I'd have to kill for a car like this." I kid you not. He literally said he would kill for my car. I didn't immediately take it as a threat, as there was absolutely no emotion in the statement, and it was a common turn of phrase. Nevertheless, I was getting very uncomfortable. My sister's boyfriend's house is just barely inside the road. I was so worked up that I decided I was going to stop there. I was pretty sure I could get a few beats in on the door before this guy attacked me for not taking him to his brother's place. As I approached the driveway, my heart sank. There were no cars there, and there wasn't a garage. No one was home. I was on my own now. As we passed the driveway, he said something that caught me off guard. "His house is about a mile up ahead." "I thought his house was a mile from your car?" "No, it's a mile from here." "Okay." I kept driving, but looked at my odometer. I was giving him 1 mile. That was it. We drove in silence, for which I was grateful. He was still fondling my dashboard, but I figured I could ignore that. We went about 3/4 of a mile further up this desolate hollow. But when I asked him how much further, I thanked him until I was getting irritated and scared. "Just up that way. Turn right." I stopped in the middle of the abandoned road. He was pointing to a gravel road on my right. It was barely enough for my car, and it shot steeply up the mountain. "He lives up that road. Go that way." There was no way I was about to drive further into this desolate place when it seemed as if he was making up the directions as he went. There was no sign of life up there, and we had already gone further than he had originally said. "No, that's as far as we go," I said to him. "Get out." "No, come on, man. We're almost there. Just turn up that way." I looked around, and I had limited options when it came to a weapon. In fact, I had one option. The previous winter had been a bad one, so I kept a brush/ice scraper combo in my floorboard. It was plastic, but decently heavy. The scraper part had a sharp edge. I casually picked it up and set it in my lap. "No, get out." He was very reluctant. My makeshift weapon, and the fact that I was literally in the driver's seat, caused him to swing his door open. The lights instantly came on, and he turned to look at me squarely in the face. He was grinning, and his teeth looked as if they hadn't seen a dentist since before I was born. "Please." This was the first time anything he said had any inflection at all. He said it as if he were trying to sound pitiful, but it came off as mocking. "No," I said sternly, and he began to get out of the car. He was in the process of closing the door when he said one more thing. He leaned into the open door and then said, "I really like your car." He slammed the door and I took off. It was a one-lane road, so I couldn't immediately go in the direction I needed. I went up a couple of 100 feet and turned around in someone's driveway. When I approached where I had left him, I saw that he had made no progress up the gravel road toward his brother's house. In fact, it didn't look like he had moved at all. I slowed down when I got close to him. I didn't want to risk this man jumping in front of me or anything. He stared at me as I passed, and I floored it. As I drove away, I could barely make out that he had started to walk, not up the mountain, not further into the hollow, but back toward the main road. The wrecked car was still there when I drove by, and I went straight home and laid in my bed, way too terrified to sleep. I don't know what he had planned, but I'm pretty sure I wasn't driving him to his brother's house. Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I will never forget. It gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a townhouse, 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks, and so on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area with several of these townhouses spread around in my neighborhood, so seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio, though, is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I live maybe 50 meters away from school, so maybe my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone for around an hour before she got home. One day, I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure that I locked the front door and double-checked that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9. Being alone was a little scary, even though it was in the middle of the day and only for 1 hour. I then rushed to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. My room was located 1 floor over the patio with a view to the road that I told you about before. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked and I thought, oh my God, did he finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. There was a guy standing on my patio. A tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the woman from The Ring or something. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this. I eventually snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He kept on eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in bed under my sheets, shivering with fear as I hear these creepy high-pitched noises from the guy eating cigarette butts from the ashtray on my patio. I kind of just blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy, saying stuff like, "What are you doing, sir? Get over here or we'll come down and arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sounds were more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence, 1 man and 1 woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me in my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I've ever heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tossed the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, still screaming. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting the handcuffs on him, but eventually made it. After a while, he managed to wake up the female officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, then saw me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else, because he just looked at me and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." I started to cry. By this time, the neighbors started to arrive, wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and then left. Before they left, they promised to come back and talk to us about what had happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night, and he sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged individuals lived, located around 5 kilometers from where I live. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but had been forced to move when his mom, his caretaker, died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom in my house. He missed the routines, and he missed living there with her. The police had to move him from that house 5 years ago because he was extremely strong. From what I heard, he had extreme tension in his body because of the autism, making his muscles grow stronger and stronger throughout the years. That was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came that day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again. He promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life went back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I bought the house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I saw this random guy stopping by the road by my fence. He just stood there looking at me. I looked at him and I gave him a nod, and then I heard the high-pitched noises. Holy crap, it was him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again, but I kept my cool a bit better than when I was 9. I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later, and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. He didn't. He smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside. His face lit up, pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom. It almost made me tear up. All of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. I realized that I had to call the facility to let them know, though. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up, crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later. We made a deal. His name is Eric, and I now consider Eric my friend. Every Sunday from the day he returned, Eric and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week. It makes my heart really warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet again, guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. But now, my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons, my friend Eric.